The early September sun hung low over the Annapolis horizon, casting gold streaks across the sprawling lawns of the United States Naval Academy. The air smelled faintly of salt water and freshly mown grass, a combination that felt both nostalgic and intimidating to the throngs of incoming cadets. Their crisp white shirts and navy pants clashed with the muddied field where senior trainees conducted morning drills, shouting commands that echoed across the campus. Amid the controlled chaos, one figure moved with unusual calm. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Blake walked along the edge of the training grounds, her posture casual, but every step deliberate. She wore standard athletic gear, a navy windbreaker over a gray t-shirt, running shoes coated with dust. Nothing about her attire suggested her real identity. Nothing that would reveal that she was a decorated Navy SEAL combat veteran. A woman who had operated in environments where life and death decisions came down to the fraction of a second. To the cadets, she was an anonymous observer, another staff member checking boxes for paperwork, the kind of figure they usually ignored. But Sarah's eyes scanned everything. Each movement, each stumble, every flinch in reaction to a shouted command. She catalogued it silently. Her hands rested loosely at her sides, but they twitched ever so slightly whenever a cadet made a critical error. To her trained mind, each mistake was a thread, a glimpse into character, a preview of how these young men and women might react when real danger arrived. A group of cadets passed her, laughing and jostling one another. A tall young man with dark hair and broad shoulders caught sight of her, then smirked. "Who led her on the field?" he muttered under his breath, loud enough for a few others to hear. They snickered. Sarah said nothing. She didn't need to. She had been in environments where mockery and disrespect were far less polite, far more dangerous. And yet, she held herself still. Her calmness drew their curiosity, even as it sparked their arrogance. They didn't know she had been deployed in Afghanistan multiple times, that she had operated in hostile territory with only a handful of men she trusted implicitly, or that she had survived firefights that left scars visible and invisible. The morning drills began in earnest. Cadets were grouped in teams and ordered to sprint across the muddy fields, tackle obstacle courses, climb walls, and carry weighted packs. The air was filled with the grunts of exertion, the staccato commands of upperclassmen, and the occasional frustrated shout from those who stumbled under the strain. Sarah moved to the center of the field, not as a participant, but as an observer, her hands clasped behind her back. She studied their movements, timing, coordination, leadership, and the subtle betrayals of fatigue. It was during the climbing drills that she first caught the attention of Cadet Ryan Keller, the tall, brash upperclassman who seemed to crave attention and respect through sheer volume. Ryan had been watching her too, though he likely didn't realize why. Her measured pace, the calm way she adjusted her stance to maintain balance, and the subtle correction of posture as she walked past the ropes and walls made him uneasy. He wasn't used to being outclassed in observation. He was used to leading, to mocking, to asserting dominance. When Sarah finally stepped onto the obstacle course to demonstrate technique, merely to show the proper angle for a rope climb, Ryan took offense. "Keep up, ma'am," he barked, his voice carrying across the field. A few cadets laughed nervously. Sarah didn't respond. She simply began climbing with precision. Her movements were fluid, controlled, and shockingly fast. Cadets who had been struggling to complete the course began whispering to one another. Ryan's face twisted with a mixture of embarrassment and anger. He puffed his chest and shoved past her, trying to assert authority. "You think you belong here?" he sneered, shoving her shoulder hard. The world seemed to slow for a fraction of a second. Sarah's hand instinctively moved, but she didn't strike. She simply fell into the mud, her legs splayed, her hands smearing dirt across her sleeves. The cadets erupted in laughter, some pointing, some snickering nervously. She paused, letting them watch. Not one sound left her lips. Slowly, deliberately, she pushed herself up from the ground, wiped the mud from her hands and knees, and continued across the course. Every motion was deliberate. Every movement was a quiet statement. She was not intimidated. She was not angry. She was unshakable. The laughter faltered. Ryan's smugness began to crack, replaced by an uneasy tension he couldn't name. The remainder of the morning passed in a blur of drills, shouted commands, and exhausted cadets. Sarah continued to watch and correct, quietly stepping in where necessary, her instructions calm but unyielding. She didn't boast. She didn't shout. Her authority came from an invisible weight, from the presence of someone who had lived through situations far harsher than anything these cadets could imagine. As the drills concluded, Sarah took a moment to walk along the edge of the field again. The cadets' chatter had grown more subdued. She could feel the shift in energy, the subtle change in demeanor. For the first time that morning, they weren't thinking about pranks or ego. They were thinking about her, about the quiet competence she exuded, and about the unsettling possibility that they had underestimated her. Sarah looked out over the training field, across the sea of young, ambitious faces. Some would rise to leadership. Some would fall to arrogance. But in that moment, she allowed herself a small, almost imperceptible smile. She hadn't even spoken a word yet, and already lessons were being learned. Some of the most important ones would come not from what she said, but from what she did, from the quiet, unshakable presence of someone who had seen the worst the world had to offer and survived. And somewhere in the midst of the cadets, Ryan Keller's mind raced. He didn't yet know who she was, not truly. He didn't know the battlefield medals, the scars, the missions he couldn't even dream of. But that would change soon. Very soon. By the time the cadets were dismissed for breakfast, a few whispered to each other in awe. "Who is she?" one asked. Another shook his head. "I don't know, but I think we just got schooled." By a civilian. Sarah walked away quietly, her jacket streaked with mud, her gaze calm, her mind already analyzing the next set of drills. She wasn't here to show off. She was here to test, observe, and shape the future. And the morning had only just begun. The next morning, Annapolis was shrouded in a soft mist, dew clinging to the manicured grass, and fog curling along the edges of the training grounds. The cadets gathered for the first endurance drill of the week, a grueling test of strength, agility, and mental fortitude. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Blake arrived early, her presence almost unnoticed at first. She moved along the sidelines, stretching lightly, her eyes scanning every cadet like a predator reading the movements of prey, though there was no malice in her gaze, only precision. Among the cadets, Ryan Keller was already boasting loudly to his peers. He flexed his arms and cracked jokes, the kind that were meant to intimidate the younger trainees. "Keep up, rookies," he bellowed. "You'll need more than energy drinks to survive out here." His group laughed, slapping backs and jostling each other. When his gaze fell on Sarah, his confidence only grew. She stood quietly, observing, taking notes with invisible markers in her mind. He didn't yet know why her calm made him uneasy. The cadets began the sprinting portion of the drill. Mud clung to their shoes as they tore across the uneven field, heart rates spiking under the strain. Sarah jogged lightly to keep pace, but deliberately stayed behind, letting them think she was no threat. She wanted to see who would lead, who would falter, who would try to assert dominance. It didn't take long for Ryan to notice. His upper lip curled into a smirk. "Looks like someone thinks she can keep up," he sneered to his friends, loud enough for her to hear. Sarah's gaze didn't waver. She simply nodded slightly and kept her stride. But that nod was enough to spark a challenge in Ryan's mind. The group approached the obstacle wall, a towering wooden structure lined with ropes, mud patches, and narrow ledges. The rules were simple. Climb, touch the top, descend safely, and continue. Some cadets struggled immediately, slipping, falling, and scrambling back up. Sarah approached the wall with quiet determination. She assessed it carefully, gauging the strength, angles, and timing required to ascend efficiently. Ryan stepped forward, his chest puffed out. "Watch this, rookies," he said, climbing with a combination of brute force and swagger. The others cheered. Then he turned toward Sarah. "Don't think you can just stroll past me," he said, his tone a mixture of mockery and disbelief. Sarah didn't respond. She didn't need to. With a smooth, almost effortless motion, she began her climb. Every movement was precise, hands gripping the rope just so, legs positioned perfectly against the wall. Her body moved with efficiency that only years of specialized training could create. Cadets gasped, whispering among themselves. Some stared openly, mouths slightly agape. Ryan's confidence wavered. He was used to dominating, to being the center of attention. Here was someone who made the impossible look easy, without a hint of showiness. Frustration built in Ryan like heat under his collar. He reached the top just as Sarah's hands gripped the rope, pulling herself upward with a controlled, methodical rhythm. "What's this?" he muttered under his breath, annoyance cutting through his tone. "A girl teaching me how to climb?" When Sarah neared the top, Ryan attempted to assert authority. He reached out to block her path. "You think you belong here?" he snapped, his voice loud, sharp, and filled with aggression. He shoved her shoulder, expecting her to falter, to stumble, to cry out like a rookie. But Sarah didn't stumble. The shove was meaningless to her. She fell to the dirt anyway, but she controlled it, twisting her body so that the impact was minimal. Her legs bent, arms steady. She hit the mud hard enough to leave streaks on her clothes, but not enough to break her composure. The cadets gasped, some laughing nervously, others freezing in uncertainty. For a heartbeat, the field was silent. Time seemed to slow. Sarah blinked, then pushed herself up with deliberate calm. Every motion was calculated, precise, a demonstration of control. She wiped mud from her sleeves and pants, then resumed climbing the obstacle, completing it faster than most cadets could manage on their first attempt. Ryan's smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of unease. When she descended, Sarah didn't yell, didn't challenge him. She simply walked past, shoulders squared, gaze forward. Her quiet authority spoke louder than words ever could. Cadets who had been mocking her moments before now whispered among themselves. "They're all growing." The power in her stillness was palpable. Ryan's pride burned, but he was unsure how to respond. He muttered under his breath, a barely audible curse. Some of his peers avoided his gaze, sensing a shift in the field's energy. This wasn't about climbing, or speed, or mud. This was about presence, about mastery, about a calm that radiated competence. Sarah didn't stop there. She moved among the cadets, correcting minor mistakes with subtle gestures. A hand adjustment here, a shift in stance there. She didn't shout, she didn't scold. She simply demonstrated through action, letting results speak. The difference was immediate. Cadets began improving, following her examples without even realizing they were learning from someone far beyond their experience. By mid-morning, the field had transformed. What started as chaos became structured. The cadets were pushed to their limits physically, but also mentally. Their arrogance, once unchecked, had been tempered by the quiet authority of a woman they had thought weak. Every glance at Sarah reminded them that she could dismantle their assumptions without raising her voice. After the obstacle course, Sarah retreated to the sidelines, allowing the final sprint portion of the drill to commence. Cadets lined up, muscles tense, hearts racing. Ryan gritted his teeth, frustration still simmering. He wanted to assert dominance again, to reclaim his ego. But every time he glanced at Sarah, her presence reminded him that arrogance was dangerous. The drill ended with exhaustion written on every face. Cadets slumped, panting, drenched in sweat and mud. Ryan avoided eye contact, staring at the ground instead. He had expected a confrontation, maybe laughter, maybe a show of strength from Sarah, but nothing. She had walked through the chaos, controlled it silently, and left an impression that would linger far longer than any shout or shove. Sarah watched them carefully, noting who had followed orders, who had faltered, and who had risen above. Her evaluation wasn't just about skill. It was about character, about the way they handled challenge and respect. And among them, she saw the seeds of leadership and the stubbornness of arrogance that would need correction. When the cadets were dismissed for breakfast, a quiet buzz followed Sarah's steps. Whispers floated through the group. "Who is she?" "I don't know, but she's insane. She just walked through everyone." Ryan, meanwhile, clenched his fists. He didn't understand her yet. He didn't know about Hellman, about firefights, about missions most of these cadets would never even hear about. But one thing was certain. The woman he shoved into the dirt was far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. As Sarah left the field, she paused for a moment to glance back. The sun had fully risen now, glinting on wet grass and mud streaks. She allowed herself a faint smile, almost imperceptible. She didn't need recognition, and she didn't need victory. The day had already begun to teach its lessons, and the real tests were yet to come. The calm before the storm stretched across the training grounds, a quiet anticipation in the air. The cadets had been challenged, yes, but they had only seen the first layer of Sarah Blake. Her presence, quiet but commanding, would shape every day of their training from here on. And when they finally realized who she truly was, it would change the way they saw leadership, strength, and respect forever. The barracks smelled of morning coffee, polished floors, and the faint tang of antiseptic as cadets trickled in after the brutal drills on the training field. Conversations buzzed quietly, punctuated by the occasional clatter of trays and the low hum of exhaustion. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Blake walked in last, unnoticed at first, her steps silent but deliberate. The muddy streaks on her athletic gear had dried into faint brown patterns, proof of her morning on the obstacle course. Yet she carried herself with calm dignity, as though the mud were merely part of a routine inspection. Cadets whispered in corners, heads tilted toward one another. "Did you see her?" A first-year murmured, eyes wide with disbelief. "She? She finished that wall faster than anyone I've ever seen." Another shook his head. "No, seriously, she fell, and then she just got up, like it didn't even happen." Their whispers traveled, growing louder with each passing minute, reaching ears that prided themselves on being indifferent. Ryan Keller sat at the edge of the mess hall table, a tray of eggs and toast untouched. His pride had taken a hit. The shove, the mud, the quiet mastery of Sarah Blake. He had expected resistance, maybe anger, maybe a verbal clash. Instead, she had simply moved forward, leaving him standing in a swirl of uncertainty. He clenched his fists under the table, frustration simmering beneath his calm exterior. He couldn't shake the sense that he had underestimated someone, and it gnawed at him. Commander Dalton entered the hall abruptly, his boots clicking on the polished floor. The room immediately grew quiet. Cadets straightened, instinctively aware that his presence meant attention was required. He was a tall man, his uniform pristine, face lined with years of authority and experience. He scanned the room, then fixed his gaze on Sarah. "Lieutenant Commander Blake will be conducting Phase 2 of the SEAL combat evaluation today," he announced. His voice echoed, carrying weight. Murmurs rippled through the room like a rising tide. The cadets exchanged confused glances. Ryan's stomach twisted. Phase 2? He muttered to his tablemates. I thought she was just observing. His friends shrugged, equally unsure. Dalton's next words cut through the remaining noise. Cadets, Lieutenant Commander Blake is a decorated Navy SEAL veteran. All training today will fall under her evaluation. Respect her authority. Follow her instructions. Understand that what you are about to witness reflects the standards expected of you. The hall went still. Ryan's fork clattered onto his tray. He stared at her, suddenly noticing the subtle details. The faint trident insignia glinting on her jacket. The quiet intensity in her eyes, and the posture of someone who had been trained to survive in circumstances far harsher than Annapolis could ever simulate. He had shoved her into mud without knowing she had endured situations that would crush most men. The weight of his arrogance hit him fully for the first time. Around the hall, whispers became louder. She's a SEAL? One cadet asked, incredulous. Another nodded, eyes wide. No way. The woman who just walked through us on the field? Cadets shifted in their seats, some suddenly aware of their own mistakes and the arrogance that had led them to underestimate her. Sarah sat quietly, finishing a simple breakfast. She didn't boast. She didn't flaunt medals or recount battles. Her presence alone spoke volumes. Her eyes, calm and precise, scanned the cadets as if already assessing how they would respond to the knowledge of her true experience. Ryan, meanwhile, felt an unfamiliar sensation. Doubt. He had spent weeks building a reputation, asserting dominance, believing himself untouchable. And now, standing in the quiet storm of realization, he wasn't sure of anything. During the morning briefing, Sarah was introduced formally. Commander Dalton gestured toward her, his voice carrying authority. Cadets, this is Lieutenant Commander Sarah Blake. She will lead today's tactical exercises and evaluate your performance. Pay attention, learn, and respect her experience. Ryan's stomach tightened. His friends nudged him, whispering, Dude, she's serious. That shove. That was a mistake. He clenched his jaw, face flushed. Pride warred with the growing respect he couldn't yet voice. It was unsettling, a rare experience for someone accustomed to being in command of attention and authority. The first tactical exercise began shortly after. Cadets were split into teams, ordered to complete a timed navigation and rescue drill across a forested part of the campus. Sarah moved among them, her steps deliberate, voice calm but firm. Observe angles, cover your teammates, communicate, she instructed. Each command was precise, yet lacking any hint of condescension. The cadets felt compelled to follow, not out of fear, but from the growing understanding that her knowledge was unmatched. Ryan led his team into the woods, initially trying to reassert control. He barked orders, but soon noticed a subtle pattern in the cadets' movements. Some hesitated, unsure whether to act on his instructions or recall Sarah's corrections. The momentary chaos was enough to shake his confidence further. Every instinct told him that the woman he had shoved in the mud was watching, evaluating, and silently judging every decision. By midday, the whispers had evolved into quiet acknowledgement. Cadets who had been skeptical began following Sarah's instructions carefully, replicating the precise techniques she demonstrated. Her authority was no longer in question. Even Ryan, though struggling with pride, couldn't deny the efficiency of her approach. She didn't correct him publicly, but every subtle gesture, every adjustment, silently reminded him of the gulf between experience and arrogance. At one point, Sarah stopped the exercise. She gathered the cadets, her presence commanding attention without shouting. Confidence without skill is dangerous. Leadership isn't earned by shoving others into the dirt or mocking those who struggle. True authority comes from experience, discipline, and respect, not ego. Her voice was calm, but each word cut deep into the subconscious of every cadet present. Ryan felt it like a punch to the chest. After the session, cadets lingered in quiet discussion. Some were awed, some embarrassed, and some deeply contemplative. Ryan walked alone to the edge of the clearing, staring at the mud-streaked tracks from yesterday's obstacle course. He remembered the shove, the laughter, the sudden realization of how completely he had misjudged her. His pride was wounded, but it was being reshaped into something heavier, respect, tempered by humility. As the sun began its descent over Annapolis, Sarah moved through the ranks one last time, making subtle observations. She didn't speak, didn't demand attention, but the cadets felt it, the unmistakable presence of someone who had endured far more than they could imagine. Even in silence, she taught lessons in discipline, courage, and quiet authority. That evening, cadets returned to their barracks in thoughtful silence. Ryan's friends tried to lighten the mood, but he only stared out the window, thinking of Sarah Blake, the woman he had pushed into mud, had survived firefights, lost teammates, and carried scars invisible to anyone who hadn't faced the real world's cruelty. And yet, here she was, calm, composed, uncheckable. The realization settled like a stone in his chest. They had been wrong. They had underestimated her. They had mocked her, pushed her, and dismissed her presence. And now, the truth was undeniable. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Blake was not just a visitor or an observer. She was a Navy SEAL combat veteran, and the lessons she would impart would shape not only their physical skills, but their understanding of honor, humility, and true leadership. Ryan clenched his fists at his sides, a mixture of regret and resolve stirring inside him. Tomorrow would bring another round of drills, another test of strength and skill. But this time, he would act differently. He would watch, he would learn, and he would respect the woman who had already left an indelible mark on him, and on every cadet who had witnessed the quiet power of someone who had been through hell and emerged unbroken. By nightfall, the academy was silent, except for the distant sound of water lapping against the docks and the faint murmur of cadets recounting the day's events. In the darkness, Sarah walked alone, reviewing the day in her mind. The evaluations were already forming, notes in her head ready to guide the next phase. But more than that, she allowed herself a small thought. The next generation was listening now, paying attention. They had been humbled. They had been taught, without a single raised voice, without a hint of arrogance from her. And that was exactly how she wanted it. The whispers in the mess hall would not be forgotten. They would evolve into a legend, a quiet story the cadets would share for years. "Do you remember the first time we met her?" they would say. "Do you remember how she just walked through us?" Ryan, lying in his bunk, stared at the ceiling. He couldn't sleep, not because of exhaustion, but because the realization gnawed at him. For the first time, he understood what true mastery looked like, and he knew that tomorrow would be a reckoning, one that he was not yet fully prepared for. And somewhere in the shadows of Annapolis, Sarah Blake prepared herself for the next morning, ready to continue shaping cadets not with words, but with presence, discipline, and the quiet authority of someone who had already faced the worst the world had to offer and survived. The morning sun had barely broken through the dense fog hovering over the Naval Academy grounds, casting a silvery light across the sprawling training fields. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Blake arrived promptly, her boots crunching softly on gravel, the faint sound swallowed by the morning mist. She wore a crisp tactical jacket over her uniform, the silver seal trident gleaming subtly on her chest. Today would be different. No mud, no obstacle walls. This was about precision, discipline, and mental acuity. And she had the cadets' full attention. The previous days had shaken them. Cadets whispered quietly in the barracks about the woman who had endured the shove and risen with unflinching composure. For some, it was awe. For Ryan Keller, it was a mix of humiliation, frustration, and the first glimmer of respect he could not yet voice. He arrived on the field early, trying to mask the nervous energy coiling in his chest. Sarah called the cadets together, her voice calm yet commanding. Today, we focus on tactical precision and team coordination. Ego has no place in this environment. Mistakes are costly. Hesitation is costly. You will execute drills as I demonstrate, or you will learn the hard way. The words carried weight far beyond their simplicity, rippling through the group like a wave. Every cadet understood that she meant it, not as threat, but as fact. The first exercise was a hostage simulation. A dummy represented a trapped civilian, and cadets were divided into teams to extract it under time pressure. Ryan led his team confidently, barking orders, convinced that his usual loud authority would suffice. "Cover me! Move!" he shouted, adrenaline fueling arrogance. The cadets scrambled, but coordination was poor. They bumped into each other, tripped over roots, and failed to communicate effectively. Sarah observed silently from a ridge, noting every flaw. She stepped forward, climbing the slope with ease, her presence immediately commanding attention. "Keller," she said calmly, yet each word landed like a hammer. "Form a proper perimeter. Angles, not noise. Communication, not ego." She didn't raise her voice, but the authority behind her words left no room for dismissal. Ryan froze, struck by the quiet power behind her tone. His teammates looked to her, waiting for clarification, while he realized that his loud instructions had caused more chaos than control. With a subtle motion of her hand, Sarah demonstrated a proper sweep of the perimeter, moving with efficiency that seemed almost effortless. Every cadet watched, mesmerized, as she navigated the terrain, cleared obstacles, and positioned herself perfectly to cover the team. When it came time to simulate the breach, Sarah took over. She moved with silent precision, disarming imaginary threats, clearing paths, and guiding cadets with gestures rather than words. Ryan and his team struggled to keep up, each mistake underscoring their lack of coordination. For the first time, Ryan's confidence wavered. He realized that all the shouting and posturing in the world could not replace skill, precision, and experience. After the exercise, Sarah gathered the cadets in a tight circle, her gaze scanning each face. Confidence without execution is arrogance. Leadership without understanding is chaos. You mocked what you didn't understand. Today, you will follow and learn. Repeat the drills until you embody the principles, or you will fail. And failure here is not embarrassing, it's instructive. Her tone was calm, yet firm enough to silence any dissent. Ryan swallowed hard. His throat felt dry. He had been mocked before, reprimanded, and even punished during training, but this was different. This was undeniable authority, rooted in experience and survival. His chest tightened, pride clashing with the growing awareness that Sarah Blake was not someone to test. She had not shouted, not demanded, yet every cadet instinctively obeyed. The drills continued for hours. Sarah demonstrated tactical maneuvers repeatedly, each demonstration flawless. Cadets who had been arrogant the day before began to falter less, adjust their movements, and communicate more effectively. Mistakes were met with correction, not ridicule, and gradually the group began to move as a single unit. Ryan struggled with the lessons. He wanted to prove himself, to regain the sense of dominance he had lost, yet every time he tried, Sarah's calm observation reminded him of his limitations. She didn't humiliate him publicly. She didn't scold him harshly. She simply demonstrated, guided, and corrected. And in doing so, she taught lessons far deeper than tactical maneuvers, lessons in humility, respect, and restraint. By midday, exhaustion set in. The cadets were covered in sweat and dirt, muscles aching from the rigorous drills. Yet a subtle transformation had occurred. Their movements were sharper, decisions faster, communication clearer. Sarah's presence had shaped them, not through fear, but through the quiet authority of someone who had lived through circumstances where hesitation meant death. During a short break, Ryan approached her tent cautiously, avoiding eye contact with other cadets. "Ma'am," he said quietly, voice strained. I realize now. I was wrong." Sarah regarded him silently, her eyes steady, calm, and piercing. She nodded once. "Acknowledgement is the first step," she said softly. "Understanding comes next. Action follows. Don't confuse humility with weakness. And don't mistake experience for arrogance." Ryan's jaw tightened. He nodded, swallowing pride that had once felt invincible. For the first time, he felt the weight of her words sink deep. He wasn't just witnessing a superior officer. He was learning from someone who had survived impossible odds, who had endured losses he could not imagine, and who now commanded respect through presence alone. The afternoon exercises focused on endurance and teamwork. Cadets were paired to simulate rescue operations under fire, navigating through uneven terrain with weighted packs. Sarah moved silently among them, correcting angles, demonstrating proper lifting techniques, and subtly adjusting strategies without interrupting the flow. The cadets followed her guidance, moving with increasing efficiency. Mistakes were fewer, corrections immediate, and teamwork far more cohesive than at any previous session. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, Sarah gathered the cadets once more. Leadership is not performed in front of cameras or through intimidation. It is proven in moments when lives or missions or trust depend on your judgment. Today, you have taken the first steps toward understanding what that means. Keep your focus. Continue to learn. And never underestimate those you think you know. Her words settled like a quiet storm over the group. Ryan felt a mix of awe, shame, and determination. The arrogance that had driven him yesterday was tempered now by respect, and the recognition that true mastery could not be faked. As the cadets were dismissed, Sarah lingered briefly, observing them as they moved across the field. Some whispered to each other, recounting how efficiently they had executed maneuvers. Others simply stared after her, awe-struck. Ryan remained. A moment longer, hands clenched, watching the figure who had appended his assumptions and reshaped his understanding of leadership. When Sarah finally left the field, she paused at the edge, her eyes sweeping over the horizon, noting subtle improvements in the cadets' postures, movements, and interactions. She allowed herself a faint, satisfied smile. Today had been more than training. It had been a revelation. And tomorrow would push them further, testing not just their skill, but their character. Even in silence, Sarah Blake had proven one undeniable truth. Mastery, discipline, and respect could not be taught by shouting, nor demanded through ego. It came quietly, indelibly, and those who truly witnessed it would never forget. As dusk settled over Annapolis, the cadets trudged back to their barracks, exhausted but transformed. Ryan walked last, lost in thought, replaying each moment of the day in his mind. He thought of the shove, the mud, and the quiet, unyielding presence of Sarah Blake. He realized that the woman he had mocked was now the measuring standard for everything he had ever believed about strength, leadership, and courage. And somewhere, in the shadows of the training field, Sarah Blake prepared herself for tomorrow's exercises, ready to continue shaping cadets, not only through physical skill, but through the quiet power of a presence forged in combat and tempered by experience. The journey had only begun, and the lessons would be relentless. Night had fallen over Annapolis, and the training grounds were bathed in a silvery light from the moon. The faint hum of crickets and the distant lapping of water against the docks created a deceptive calm. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Blake walked alone along the edge of the campus, her boots leaving quiet impressions in the dew-soaked grass. The day's training had ended, but her mind was far from peace. As the cadets returned to their barracks, exhausted yet enlightened, Sarah allowed herself a moment of solitude. Her steps slowed, her breathing deepened, and for the first time that day, she let her guard drop, just enough to allow memory to surface. The sights, sounds, and sensations of her deployments in Helmand Province, Afghanistan, rose unbidden. The scorching desert sun, the sting of sand in her eyes, the oppressive tension of enemy fire. It had been a deployment unlike any other. Sarah's SEAL team had been tasked with a critical mission to secure a village suspected of harboring insurgents. Every step forward had been measured, every decision weighed against consequences that could cost lives. The memories of that time were vivid, the feel of her rifle steady in her hands, the crackle of cums, the sudden eruption of gunfire that had shredded the silence. Her thoughts drifted to her teammates, men she had trusted with her life, men who had become family in the chaos of war. Petty Officer James Carter, a stoic sharpshooter, had been the first to fall. The memory of finding him, lifeless in the sand, stayed with her like a shadow she could never shake. Then came Chief Warrant Officer Lewis, pinned under debris during an ambush, screaming for help that had come too late. And finally, the fire that consumed their extraction point, leaving 3 of her brothers in arms dead and several more wounded. Sarah's heart tightened with the weight of survivor's guilt, a constant companion since that day. She had made it out alive, but at the cost of men she considered family. The memories were not just of the firefight itself, but of the quiet moments afterward, the long nights spent tending to the wounded, the silent prayers whispered over the fallen, and the hollow feeling of returning home while the world continued as if nothing had happened. Tonight, in the quiet of Annapolis, those ghosts felt closer than ever. She walked to the edge of the water, the moon reflecting off the ripples. Her hands, calloused from years of handling weapons and equipment, rested lightly on her rifle case slung across her shoulder. This was her burden, her constant reminder that experience came with a price. And it was precisely that experience that had brought her here, to the Naval Academy, to train cadets who had yet to grasp the weight of true leadership. Sarah thought of Ryan Keller and the other cadets. They had mocked her, underestimated her, and even physically shoved her. Yet, in their naivety, they represented potential, raw, unshaped, and in need of guidance. She did not wish them harm, nor did she crave vindication. Her mission here was deeper, to instill in them the understanding that leadership was earned, that strength came from discipline, and that courage was inseparable from responsibility. She remembered a particular moment in Helmand, one that haunted her more than the firefight itself. The team had been advancing through a narrow alley when insurgents opened fire. The coms were chaotic, screams mixing with gunfire. She had seen a young Afghan boy caught in the crossfire, frozen in terror. Without hesitation, she had risked her own safety, pulling him to cover and shielding him with her body. That instinct, to protect, to act decisively under unimaginable pressure, had saved his life. But it had also left her questioning her own humanity in the face of relentless violence. That instinct now guided her teaching. Every drill, every instruction, every correction she offered to the cadets was rooted in that same principle: survival, precision, and the protection of those who depended on you. A shove on the obstacle course, the mocking laughter, trivial in comparison to the reality she had faced, yet symbolic of the arrogance that could lead to failure in moments of true danger. Sarah crouched by the water, letting the cool breeze wash over her face. She allowed herself a deep exhale, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly. The ghosts of Helmand were always with her, but they were not her masters. They were reminders, teachers in their own right, that survival required more than skill. It required discipline, humility, and the willingness to bear responsibility for every action. Her mind drifted back to Ryan Keller. She thought of the shove, the smirk, the arrogance, and how quickly it had been replaced by doubt. He had witnessed her mastery, her calm, and her authority, but he had yet to understand the full depth of her experience. That understanding would come, as it always did, not through words alone, but through observation, reflection, and challenge. Sarah rose, brushing the dew from her jacket. The night was deepening, the campus quiet, except for the distant lights of the barracks. She felt a renewed sense of purpose. Tomorrow's drills would be harder, more demanding, pushing the cadets to their limits both physically and mentally. But she knew they were ready, or at least, ready to begin understanding what true preparation meant. As she walked back toward the dormitories, Sarah allowed herself a small, private smile. She had carried the weight of Helmand for years, yet now that burden served a new purpose. It was not only about survival or honor. It was about teaching the next generation to recognize what mattered, to respect experience, and to understand that leadership was inseparable from accountability. The cadets would never see the flashbacks she carried, the nights spent replaying decisions, the faces of those she had lost. But they would feel it in the quiet authority she radiated, in the calm precision of her instructions, and in the unspoken lessons that demanded respect. They would learn, slowly but surely, that strength without discipline was meaningless, and arrogance could be deadly. Ryan Keller lay awake in his bunk that night, restless and thoughtful. Memories of the obstacle course, Sarah's calm composure, and her flawless demonstration of authority replayed in his mind. He felt a strange mixture of awe, shame, and determination. For the first time, he truly understood that he had underestimated someone, and that the path to respect would require more than bravado. Meanwhile, Sarah Blake returned to her quarters, removing her jacket and setting her rifle aside. She sat for a moment in silence, reflecting on Helmand, on the cadets, and on the delicate balance between authority and respect. The ghosts of her past would always be with her, but tonight they were allies, reminders of why she had survived, why she had endured, and why she had come to Annapolis. The night stretched on, and Annapolis slept under a blanket of quiet determination. The cadets dreamed, some of their own performance, some of the mysterious woman who had so effortlessly commanded attention. But Sarah Blake's mind remained alert, reviewing notes, planning exercises, and preparing for the challenges to come. Tomorrow, she would push them further. She would test their limits, demand their focus, and continue shaping them not only as cadets, but as future leaders. And somewhere in that process, the lessons of Helmand would quietly ripple through their minds, teaching resilience, humility, and the silent strength that defined her. The moon rose high over the training grounds, silver light glinting off the water. And in the quiet of the night, Sarah Blake allowed herself one final thought. The ghosts of the past were never truly gone, but when harnessed, they could guide, instruct, and prepare others for battles they had yet to face. And so she rested, ready to return to the field at dawn, carrying the weight of her experience as both shield and sword, poised to challenge the cadets and shape the next chapter of their lives. Dawn broke over Annapolis with a crisp chill in the air, the mist hanging low over the training grounds like a living veil. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Blake arrived at the edge of the dense forest on campus, her boots sinking slightly into the dew-soaked earth. Today's exercise would be unlike any other. It was a test of observation, coordination, endurance, and leadership under pressure, a simulation of real combat scenarios. The cadets didn't yet know the full intensity she had planned. Cadets gathered, teeth chattering from the cool morning air, shivering with a mix of anticipation and anxiety. Ryan Keller stood at the front, trying to maintain composure. His friends nudged him, whispering reminders of Sarah's authority. He glanced at her, feeling that familiar mix of awe and apprehension. Yesterday's lessons were still raw in his mind, a constant reminder that overconfidence could lead to humiliation, or worse, failure. Sarah addressed them with her usual calm authority. "This exercise is a field test. You will navigate through these woods, locate designated checkpoints, and complete a simulated extraction under realistic conditions. Your performance will be evaluated on teamwork, decision-making, situational awareness, and execution. Any hesitation could cost your team valuable time, and in real-world scenarios, hesitation can cost lives." The cadets absorbed her words with a mixture of fear and determination. Even Ryan, who prided himself on leadership, felt the weight of her authority. He realized this was not a drill in which arrogance would suffice. Today, experience would dictate success, and Sarah Blake's presence was a constant reminder that failure had consequences. The cadets split into teams, and Sarah led her observations from strategic vantage points, moving silently through the underbrush. She had arranged the exercise meticulously. Hidden checkpoints, unexpected obstacles, and subtle threats meant to test their reactions. The forest seemed alive, shadows twisting in the morning light, every rustle or snapped twig potentially significant. Ryan's team moved cautiously, attempting to implement yesterday's lessons. Communication was deliberate, movements coordinated. Yet tension hung thick in the air. The first checkpoint lay across a narrow ravine, its steep walls slippery from overnight rain. Ryan's confidence wavered as his team hesitated. "We need to move now," he barked, more out of fear than authority. The cadets scrambled, slipping and sliding, but Sarah had anticipated this. From the ridge above, she watched silently, noting each cadet's choices and mistakes. She could see Ryan's struggle, the clash between pride and humility, between desire to assert control and the realization that his knowledge alone was insufficient. With a swift, quiet movement, she descended closer to the team, guiding them subtly. A hand signal here, a repositioning there, she corrected their approach without speaking a word. The team reached the checkpoint, but not without incident. One cadet lost footing on a moss-covered rock, nearly falling into the ravine. Ryan reacted instinctively, reaching for her to steady him, but Sarah had already anticipated the hazard, intercepting him with calculated precision, steadying both him and the struggling cadet. The cadet stared, wide-eyed. Every movement of hers was flawless, yet she made it appear effortless. "Observe the terrain, anticipate risk, and protect each other," she said calmly. Her voice carried authority without arrogance. Ryan swallowed, chastened. The lesson was clear. Leadership was not about loud commands or bravado. It was about awareness, foresight, and protection of those under one's charge. The exercise continued deeper into the forest. Sarah had hidden obstacles, fallen logs, narrow streams, and mock enemy positions. Cadets were forced to make rapid decisions, navigating both physical challenges and simulated threats. Panic flared in some, hesitation in others, but Sarah moved among them like a ghost, silently correcting mistakes, guiding movements, and demonstrating patience tempered by experience. Ryan found himself pushed to the edge of exhaustion, yet he noticed a subtle change in his team. They moved more fluidly, responding to his leadership in conjunction with Sarah's subtle corrections. He realized he had underestimated the power of quiet guidance, the authority of someone whose experience was born in life or death circumstances. Each step, each decision, reminded him of how much he still had to learn. Midway through the exercise, Sarah staged a simulated ambush. Her movements were swift, decisive, a demonstration of tactical engagement. Cadets froze, instinctively ducking, seeking cover, their eyes wide with both fear and admiration. She demonstrated proper positioning, observation of threats, and effective communication under pressure. The team executed flawlessly under her guidance, finally beginning to internalize the lessons she had imparted over the past several days. At the final checkpoint, the tension peaked. Cadets were required to carry a simulated casualty across uneven terrain while under timed pressure. Ryan's arms shook with exertion as he lifted the weight, sweat and mud streaking his uniform. The cadets followed, relying on coordination and teamwork, voices low but effective. Every mistake was met with subtle correction from Sarah, a repositioned stance, a whispered gesture, a guiding hand. When the team finally reached the extraction point, exhaustion was etched into every face. Cadets collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath, mud covering uniforms, muscles trembling. Ryan stared at Sarah, a mixture of awe, respect, and lingering pride in his own endurance. For the first time, he recognized the full magnitude of her presence, not just as a superior officer, but as someone who had survived real danger and could teach the value of calm under pressure. Sarah gathered the teams for a debrief. Her tone was calm but firm. Today you faced simulated threats, environmental challenges, and physical exhaustion. Your success depended on teamwork, foresight, and discipline. Those who relied solely on ego failed. Those who listened, observed, and adjusted succeeded. Remember this. The field does not forgive mistakes, and arrogance can be fatal. Ryan's jaw tightened. He reflected on the shove, the obstacle course, and now the woods. He had learned the cost of underestimating someone and the value of humility. He nodded to himself, determination replacing arrogance. The lesson was clear. He would never mock, never underestimate, and never assume that presence alone was enough. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, Sarah Blake surveyed the exhausted cadets. She allowed herself a small, imperceptible smile. They had been tested, pushed beyond comfort, and forced to confront both physical and mental challenges. More importantly, they had begun to understand what true leadership looked like, a presence that commanded respect, a calm that radiated authority, and skill forged through experience. Ryan walked to the edge of the clearing, glancing back at Sarah. "Ma'am," he said quietly, voice low but sincere. "Thank you. I get it now." Sarah's eyes met his, calm, unwavering, and piercing. "Understanding is only the first step," she replied. "Action comes next. Apply what you've learned, and your leadership will grow. Ignore it, and lessons become regrets." The cadets filed back to the barracks in silence, reflecting on the day's lessons. Exhaustion mingled with contemplation. Some were proud, some humbled, all transformed. And Ryan, for the first time, truly felt the weight of respect, earned not through loud commands, but through the quiet authority of someone who had survived real danger and emerged stronger. As darkness fell over Annapolis, Sarah Blake remained at the edge of the training grounds, reviewing the day in her mind. The cadets had learned, but their journey was far from complete. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests, and new opportunities to forge discipline, teamwork, and respect. The forest behind her was silent now, the echoes of footsteps and whispered lessons fading into memory. And somewhere in the quiet, the ghosts of Helmand whispered too, reminders of stakes higher than any academy exercise, shaping the woman who had survived and the cadets who would follow her example. Sarah turned back toward the academy, her mind already planning the next drill. She was relentless, precise, and unwavering. And the cadets, whether they realized it yet or not, were learning that true leadership was not about ego, loudness, or posturing. It was about preparation, discipline, and the silent power of experience. The sun had barely risen over Annapolis when the cadets assembled on the training field, their breath visible in the crisp morning air. Today was no ordinary drill. This was the final evaluation, the culmination of everything they had learned. Under the watchful eye of Lieutenant Commander Sarah Blake. The previous days had challenged them physically, mentally, and emotionally, but today would push them to their limits in ways they could scarcely anticipate. Cadets murmured nervously among themselves, glancing at Sarah, who stood at the front of the field with her usual quiet authority. Mud streaked her uniform from previous drills, yet she carried herself with a precision and poise that drew every eye. Commander Dalton had approved this final test, a combined simulation incorporating navigation, extraction, combat tactics, and leadership under pressure. The stakes were high, and the cadets knew it. Ryan Keller stood near the front, his posture straighter than the day before, though tension still lingered in his shoulders. He had spent the previous night replaying every lesson, every correction, every subtle gesture Sarah had used to guide them. Pride had been tempered by respect, and arrogance replaced with determination. For the first time, he felt the weight of true leadership pressing on his shoulders. Sarah addressed the cadets in her calm, deliberate voice. Today, you will face scenarios designed to test not only your skill, but your judgment, teamwork, and ability to lead under pressure. Every decision matters. Hesitation, arrogance, or miscalculation will have consequences. Follow protocol, trust your training, and respect your teammates. This is the final reckoning. For some, a lesson. For others, an awakening. The cadets moved into teams, each assigned a mission spanning the forest, rocky ravines, and simulated urban areas on the campus. Sarah observed silently, her eyes sharp, noting every interaction, every gesture, and every subtle lapse in attention. She had designed the exercise to push them beyond comfort, to expose weaknesses, and to reveal true character. Ryan's team moved cautiously, implementing lessons from previous drills. He kept his voice measured, directing with precision rather than volume. His teammates responded with increasing confidence, their movements more synchronized, their awareness heightened. The difference from just a few days ago was stark. Yesterday's chaos had transformed into coordinated efficiency. Midway through the exercise, Sarah introduced the first real test, a simulated ambush in a narrow alley. Cadets froze instinctively, scanning for threats. Sarah moved through the shadows, demonstrating proper engagement techniques, signaling cover positions, and guiding cadets with subtle gestures. Ryan's team executed flawlessly, applying both tactical training and teamwork. Each decision was deliberate, and each action reflected the lessons Sarah had instilled. Then came the unexpected. Sarah introduced a simulated casualty, a fellow cadet struck down during the ambush. Panic threatened to rise in Ryan's team, but the training kicked in. He remembered Helmand, remembered Sarah's calm in the chaos of real combat, and instinctively led his team in a coordinated extraction. Cadets moved swiftly, positioning themselves to protect each other while carrying the simulated casualty to safety. The tension was palpable, each heartbeat amplified by the pressure of the scenario. At the extraction point, Sarah emerged from the shadows, observing silently. Her eyes swept across the cadets, noting efficiency, hesitation, and leadership under stress. Ryan glanced at her, sweat dripping down his brow, mud streaking his uniform. He caught her gaze, steady, piercing, and assessing, and understood in that moment the full weight of her presence. The woman he had mocked, shoved, and underestimated was now the ultimate measure of his growth. The next phase involved navigating treacherous terrain under simulated enemy fire. Cadets faced obstacles designed to test endurance, coordination, and problem-solving. Ryan's team moved as a cohesive unit, following his commands while subtly incorporating lessons learned from Sarah's guidance. Mistakes were minor, corrections immediate, and teamwork seamless. The contrast with earlier drills was undeniable. At the final checkpoint, Sarah called all teams together for an assessment. She stood at the center of the field, her posture unwavering, voice calm yet commanding. You have faced simulations designed to test every facet of your training: endurance, tactical skill, teamwork, and leadership. Some of you failed before you even began, letting ego or hesitation cloud judgment. Others adapted, learned, and applied what they were taught. Today, the difference is clear. She scanned the cadets' faces, lingering on Ryan. "Keller," she said, her voice deliberate, "you have demonstrated growth. You listened. You adjusted. You led with focus rather than pride. You still have much to learn, but your progress is noted." Ryan felt a surge of relief, mixed with humility. Recognition from Sarah Blake was more significant than any praise he had ever received. Sarah's gaze then swept the entire group. Leadership is not about dominance, shouting, or intimidation. It is about judgment, foresight, and the ability to guide others under pressure. Strength without discipline is useless. Knowledge without application is dangerous. Respect those you lead and earn their trust. These are lessons that cannot be rushed nor faked. They are forged through experience, reflection, and humility. Cadets remained silent, absorbing every word. The weight of her authority was undeniable, not enforced through fear or volume, but through presence, skill, and the aura of someone who had survived far beyond the controlled environment of the academy. Even the most arrogant cadets could feel it. Sarah Blake was not just a teacher. She was a living standard, a benchmark against which all leadership would now be measured. As the final debrief concluded, Ryan approached Sarah, voice steady but tinged with emotion. "Ma'am, I understand now. Thank you for showing us the right way." Sarah nodded once, acknowledging his sincerity. Understanding is only the beginning. Leadership is a journey, not a destination. Apply these lessons wisely, and never forget what you've learned. The cadets filed back to their barracks in silence, their minds buzzing with reflection. Some spoke quietly among themselves, recounting the day's exercises, the precision of their movements, and the impact of Sarah's guidance. Others sat alone, pondering the lessons of humility, discipline, and authority they had absorbed without a single raised voice. Ryan lingered at the edge of the field, watching Sarah walk toward the academy. His pride had been tempered, his understanding deepened, and his respect earned. He realized that the shove, the mocking laughter, and his initial arrogance were all part of a necessary lesson, one he would carry for the rest of his career. Sarah paused briefly, glancing back at the field. The cadets were exhausted, but transformed. Their minds had been opened to the reality that leadership demanded more than presence. It demanded skill, judgment, and the ability to act decisively under pressure. And somewhere deep in her heart, Sarah allowed herself a faint smile. The next generation had begun to understand, in their own way, what true leadership meant. Night fell over Annapolis, the field quiet except for the distant hum of lights in the dormitories. The cadets would sleep, dream, and reflect, but the lessons would remain. And for Ryan Keller, the impact was profound. He had faced his arrogance, witnessed mastery, and begun the slow transformation from rash cadet to thoughtful leader. Sarah Blake returned to her quarters, the ghosts of Helmand whispering in her mind as they always did. They were reminders of stakes far higher than any academy exercise, shaping the woman who had survived and the cadets who had followed her guidance. Tonight, she allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. She had tested, corrected, and guided. Tomorrow, the lessons would continue, but tonight, the reckoning had been clear. The cadets had faced their own limitations, confronted their mistakes, and begun to understand the meaning of true leadership. And at the center of it all, Sarah Blake stood as the embodiment of experience, calm authority, and unwavering discipline, a standard they would strive to meet for the rest of their lives. The morning air was crisp, carrying a faint tongue of salt from the nearby Chesapeake Bay. The cadets assembled on the main parade ground, standing at attention, their uniforms spotless despite the grueling training of the past week. Today was not a drill. Today was recognition, a moment to reflect, internalize, and honor the lessons imparted by Lieutenant Commander Sarah Blake. Sarah approached slowly, her boots clicking with quiet authority on the polished stones. The seal trident gleamed subtly on her chest, a symbol of experience, sacrifice, and mastery. The cadets had come to understand, in the past days, what it truly meant to face someone who had survived real combat, someone whose calm precision could outmatch arrogance, and whose authority was earned, not demanded. Ryan Keller stood near the front, shoulders squared, jaw firm. He had spent the previous nights replaying every detail of the training, the shove on the obstacle course, the ambush drills, the extraction exercises, the navigation through treacherous terrain. Each lesson had been a blow to his pride, and yet each had forged a new understanding. Today he was ready, not just to perform, but to recognize the gravity of what he had learned. Sarah began with a measured, steady voice. Cadets, over the past week, you have faced physical trials, tactical challenges, and tests of leadership under pressure. Some of you entered this training with arrogance, others with uncertainty. Today, I want you to reflect, not on mistakes, but on lessons. Leadership is not an entitlement. It is earned through experience, discipline, and the willingness to put the needs of others above your own pride. The cadets listened intently. Every word carried weight. The murmurs from the first days had vanished. The arrogance, the skepticism, the casual bravado, all replaced by respect, contemplation, and a growing awareness of the lessons before them. Ryan stepped forward, a little shakily at first. He cleared his throat, addressing both Sarah and his fellow cadets. "Ma'am, I want to say, on behalf of our team and myself, that we understand now. We underestimated you. We mocked, we pushed, and we thought experience could be faked. We were wrong. And for that, I apologize." A hush fell over the cadets. Even those who had remained quiet in their own reflection turned to look at Ryan, recognizing the sincerity in his voice. Sarah regarded him calmly, her expression unreadable, yet not unkind. "Acknowledgement of error is the first step toward true growth," she said softly. "Now, the question is, will you apply what you've learned?" Ryan nodded firmly. "Yes, ma'am. Every lesson, every instruction, every correction." Sarah's gaze swept the parade ground, meeting each cadet's eyes. "The respect you feel for what you've learned is important, but respect alone is not enough. Respect must be paired with action, discipline, and integrity. The field will not forgive hesitation, the team will not forgive arrogance, and history will not forgive failure." The cadets absorbed the weight of her words. They had felt it in their muscles during the drills, in their hearts during the simulated ambushes, and in their minds as they struggled with pride and humility. Today was a culmination, a reckoning that had tempered arrogance into understanding, and in some cases transformed doubt into resolve. Sarah continued, her tone softening just slightly. "When I served in Helmand, Afghanistan, I faced challenges far greater than any you have encountered here. Decisions were not hypothetical. Lives were at stake, comrades, civilians, and even my own. I carry those experiences every day, not as a boast, but as a reminder of what true responsibility entails. And now, I pass some of that understanding to you." Cadets shifted, reflecting on the gravity of her words. They could imagine the desert heat, the weight of equipment, the uncertainty of each step under enemy fire. For some, The visualization was chilling. For others, it was awe-inspiring. Ryan felt a chill run down his spine. Every shove, every misstep from the first day, every arrogant word, they all seemed inconsequential compared to the magnitude of her experience. Sarah's eyes softened as she addressed the entire group. Leadership is not about recognition or admiration. It is about accountability. Every decision you make impacts others. Every action has consequences. Today, you have been tested, and many of you have succeeded. Some have learned lessons the hard way. That is the path of growth. Ryan's friends, previously skeptical of Sarah's authority, now stood quietly, heads bowed slightly in respect. They had seen her mastery firsthand, navigating the obstacle course, leading tactical drills, managing simulated crises with calm precision. They had mocked her at first, but now, in silent acknowledgement, they understood. Sarah paused, scanning the group once more. Now, as you return to your duties, carry these lessons with you. Carry humility, carry respect, carry awareness. Leadership is not a title, a uniform, or a symbol. It is a responsibility that begins with self-discipline and extends to every individual you influence. Remember what you have learned here, for it will serve you far beyond these grounds. Ryan exhaled, a mixture of relief and pride washing over him. He felt the transformation within himself. The brash cadet who had shoved Sarah into the mud had been replaced by a young man who understood the weight of leadership, the value of experience, and the importance of humility. As the assembly concluded, cadets began to file back to their barracks. Some spoke quietly to one another, sharing reflections, recounting the drills, and acknowledging their own growth. Ryan walked alongside his friends, the weight of Sarah's lessons settling into his consciousness like a stone placed carefully on a shelf, solid, permanent, and unshakable. Before leaving the field, Ryan turned back to Sarah, his voice steady. "Ma'am, we understand now. Thank you for everything." Sarah regarded him for a moment, then nodded. "Apply it wisely, Keller. Leadership is a journey. You have taken the first real steps. Keep moving forward." As the cadets dispersed, Sarah lingered for a moment, gazing at the horizon. The sun had risen higher, casting golden light over the grounds. The transformation she had guided was visible not in medals or accolades, but in posture, composure, and the quiet confidence of young leaders who had begun to understand what it truly meant to lead. The whispers from the first day, the shoves, the mockery, the disbelief were gone. In their place were nods of respect, quiet conversations about lessons learned, and the faint hum of admiration for someone who had faced unimaginable challenges and emerged not just unbroken, but stronger. Ryan lingered a moment longer, reflecting on the journey. The field had been his proving ground, but more importantly, it had been his teacher. And the greatest lesson of all was clear. Mastery and respect were not demanded, they were earned through experience, humility, and discipline. Sarah Blake, walking back toward the barracks, allowed herself a small, private smile. The cadets had been tested, guided, and transformed. They would carry these lessons forward, not only in the academy, but in every aspect of their future careers. They had learned that true authority came quietly, that experience was invaluable, and that respect was not automatic. It had to be recognized, earned, and maintained. The sun climbed higher over Annapolis, the training grounds alive with the silent energy of growth and understanding. Ryan and his fellow cadets returned to their dorms, exhausted but enlightened, forever changed by the presence of a woman who had faced the impossible and turned her experience into the greatest lesson any cadet could receive. And somewhere, in the quiet of her quarters, Sarah Blake reflected on her own journey. Helmand, the missions, the sacrifices, and now this, shaping the next generation. She had been underestimated, mocked, and challenged. And now, Through patience, skill, and presence, she had earned not only the respect of her cadets, but had transformed them in ways that would echo far beyond Annapolis. The story of that week would not be told in whispers, nor in accolades, but in the actions, decisions, and leadership of the cadets who had learned the true meaning of discipline, courage, and respect. And at the heart of it all stood Sarah Blake, a Navy SEAL combat veteran whose lessons would endure long after the sun had set on Annapolis.